Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, and welcome back. Today's video is on Liber Abba, Chapter 10 of Part 3, Magic in Theory and Practice, of the Gestures. Let's begin. Magic is word, gesture, and will. Movement is one of the key components of life and space-time, so of course it is an important part of thelemic magic. Whether choreography or a specific magical gesture, I will go into as many concepts of movement as I can fit into a reasonably lengthened video today. In addition, quote, this chapter may be divided into the following parts. 1. Attitudes. 2. Circumambulations and similar movements. 3. Changes of position. This depends upon the theory of the construction of the circle. And 4. The knocks or knells, end quote. To begin with the attitudes, quote, attitudes are of two kinds, natural and artificial. Of the first kind, prostration is the obvious example. It comes natural to man, poor creature, to throw himself on the ground in the presence of the object of his adoration, end quote. Thelemites have a philosophy centered on solar phallic worship. Our eyes cannot withstand the sun, despite the Earth's magnetic field which protects us. We automatically bow our heads to the sun every time we are outside. Really, it is no different than bowing to that which we adore. We even kneel before our leaders to demonstrate subservience, allegiance, and/or devotion. The first of these is natural, the last artificial, but all, in fact, for occultists have the same meaning if done with forethought. It is clear that there is a symbolic nature to gestures, and that is what we are exploring here today. A footnote to the above quote reads, quote, the magician must eschew prostration, or even the bending of the knee in supplication, as infamous and ignominious, an abdication of his sovereignty, end quote. In Liber Zadi it says, quote, my adepts stand upright, their head above the heavens, their feet below hell, end quote. Also in the Book of the Law, Thelemites, magicians, are identified as kings, quote, the slave shall serve, end quote. But even kings bow if it is called for. What then does it mean by we should eschew prostration? In the Gnostic Mass, even the priest kneels before the priestess once she becomes Nuit Babylon, and when the priest is first unveiled in the tomb, the priestess kneels before him. This tells me that above the abyss, a Magister Templii, who is identified with the Mother, no longer bows. But until then, before union is attained, one is subservient to the universe, and must show proper reverence. Moving on, quote, intermediate between natural and the purely artificial form of gesture, comes a class which depends on acquired habit. Thus it is natural to a European officer to offer his sword in token of surrender. A Tibetan would, however, squat, put out his tongue, and place his hand behind his right ear. Purely artificial gestures comprehend in their class the majority of definitely magic signs, though some of these simulate a natural action, e.g., the sign of the rending of the veil. But the sign of Oramoth, see the Grade Signs from the Equinox Volume 1, merely imitates merely imitates a hieroglyph, which has only a remote connection with any fact in nature. All signs must, of course, be studied with infinite patience and practiced until the connection between them and the mental attitude which they represent appears necessary. End quote. On this quote, I've said in previous videos about the grade signs of AA that each has a magical nature and things you can do whilst in them. For example, in the sign of silence, you can form and crystallize your body of light in the egg shape of your aura, and thus make it impenetrable to external attacks and stimuli which distract from the true will and your performance of the great work. Or the sign of Mater Triumphant, where you can visualize a babe suckling your breast. Then further, you can identify with both the mother giving nourishment and the babe taking nourishment, revitalizing your psychic spiritual body. Section 2 speaks on circumambulations and dance. Both are usually done in a circle going around the temple, though dance can be adapted to need, so long as it makes whatever you need to manifest come forth, i.e., the proper energy internally. Think, there is dance that makes one feel happy, another silly, another angry, etc. Thus, in ritual, you can use dance to bring about any emotion, feeling, energy, what have you. Circumambulations, on the other hand, are very simple. Deosil follows the path of the sun and is used to invoke. Widdershin is anti-clockwise, and thus goes against the sun's path, and is used to banish and close a temple at the end of ritual. A footnote on circumambulation reads, quote, "In part 2 of this book 4, it was assumed that the magician went barefoot. This would imply his intention to make intimate contact with his circle, or the earth. But he may wear sandals, for the ankh is a sandal strap. It is worn by the Egyptian gods to signify their power of going, that is, their eternal energy. By the shape, the ankh or crux ansata suggests the formula by which this going is affected in actual practice." End quote. As a side note, I recall too that red socks are highly permissible as ritual wear, though I forget the reasoning and I forget the source material that said so. Further, on passing the east, Crowley recommends that one can add the sign of the Emperor for, quote, "arousing the macrocosmic force in the circle," end quote. Two other things of note are the spiral dance, and also spinning while circumambulating. Again, Deosil invokes and Widdershin banishes. The most notable example of this is in Liber Reguli, where whilst going around the circle, one also spins, adding a dual energy to the pattern. Section 3 of this chapter begins with mention of the purport of change of position in ritual. The first example is in initiation ceremonies when a candidate is brought from station to station, usually with an officer in place, where the spot the officer stands and the officer themselves each have a symbolic and energetic energy that is bestowed upon the candidate just by being there. The next example given is of Liber Yod, Liber 831, where one goes through the 10 Sephiroth by using the Tau cross in their Thelemic magic circle, stepping from Sephiroth to Sephiroth on the cross that's on the floor, and then banishing each in turn before stepping into the next. Quote, "In the construction of a ceremony, an important thing to decide is whether you will or will not make such movements, for every circle has its natural symbolism, and even if no use is to be made of these facts, one must be careful not to let anything be inharmonious with the natural attributions." End quote. For anyone listening who has attempted our Lamp of Invisible Light ritual, an example of this is prevalent in the ritual itself. The officiant maneuvers to each of the 3 alchemical representations upon the altar at the beginning of the ritual, activating just that one in turn before going on to the next. The position of being at that station draws all focus and attention upon the magical weapon at that position. So in the east, the lamp, which represents Mercury, southwest for the thurible and sulfur, etc., etc. Quote, "To show how these positions may be used in conjunction with the spirals, suppose that you were invoking Hathor, goddess of love, to descend upon the altar. Standing on the square of Netzach will make your invocation to her, and then dance an inward spiral Deosil ending at the foot of the altar, where you sink on your knees with your arms raised above the altar, as if inviting her embrace." Also, if you ever notice in the sign of Apophis Typhon, or here, arms raised up, you're actually making a descending triangle, which allows energy, the light, a deity, to almost enter your body as in like a funnel as you welcome it in, since the triangle is pointing down towards your heart. To conclude, one may add that natural artistic ability, if you possess it, forms an excellent guide. All art is magic. Again, all art is magic. End quote. Again, with the Lamp of Invisible Light, we circumambulate clockwise the entire ritual, dealing with one alchemical principle at a time, until the end of the ceremony, when the lamp is lit and taken up after communication of Eucharist and wine is finished by all congregants, at which point the officiant then goes Widdershin to close the ceremony. Now I want to come back to this quote. Again, quote, "All art is magic," end quote. This I cannot overemphasize. Art is all creative, thus it is godly. Whether it is acting, such as in dramatic ritual, or on stage, painting, sculpting, or writing, all creativity rises up from the unconscious, and only in rare cases, if bad or poorly executed, art It deals with deep symbolism of the soul and its expression. Quote, there is no more potent means than art of calling forth true gods to visible appearance. End quote. On to section 4 of the chapter. Quote, the knocks or knells are all of the same character. They may be described collectively. The difference between them consists only in this, that the instrument with which they are made seals them with their own special properties. End quote. What that means is, if you are using your knuckles, a wand, a dagger, or staff butt, that is a knock. Using a bell is a knell. What you use affects the reverberating energy through the ritual space. A dagger, for example, is of air, so it sends an airy quality through its vibrations. It also cuts, so it severs what is there. A wand is creative and fiery, so it collects and melds present energies. Quote, it is of no great importance, even so, whether they are made by clapping the hands or stamping the feet, by strokes of one of the weapons, or by the theoretically appropriate instrument, the bell. Quote. Quote, let it first be laid down that a knock asserts a connection between the magician and the object which he strikes. Thus the use of a bell, or of the hands, means that the magician wishes to impress the atmosphere of the whole circle with what has been, or is about to be done. He wishes to formulate his will in sound, and radiate it in every direction. Moreover, to influence that which lives by breath in the sense of his purpose, and to summon it to bear witness to his word, the hands are used as symbols of his executive power, the bell to represent his consciousness exalted into music. To strike with the wand is to utter the fiat of creation. End quote. Really fast as a side note, fiat basically means in Latin, let it be. But if you look up in Israel Regarding's Golden Dawn book, especially if you have a PDF, and you do a search in the PDF fiat, there's an actual symbolic nature to the word fiat. The 4 letters represent the Latin spelling of the 4 elements, so fire, air, water, and earth, terra, so it's the T of fiat. I forget the exact words used. My Latin's a little bit rusty, but fiat is the 4 elements, but it also means let it be. So I always thought that that's a really cool magical word, and its symbolism is really deep. Now also, quote, as above said, the object struck is the object impressed. Thus, a blow upon the altar affirms that he has complied with the laws of his operation. To strike the lamp is to summon the light divine. Thus for the rest. End quote. The last thing to consider is the amount of knocks or knells. Knowing the 5 is Gabora, Mars, the pentagram, if your ritual is focused on these things, 5 knocks is perfect. 11 is the number of Magick, and is very commonly employed in Thelemic ritual. Quote, continuing on these lines, the number of knocks will refer to the Sephirah or other idea Kabbalistically cognate with that number. Thus 7 knocks will intimate Venus, 11 the Great Work, 17 the Trinity of Fathers. 17 is also an alchemical number following the formula of EAO, and 19 the feminine principle in its most general sense. Analyzing the matter a little further, we remark firstly that a battery of too many knocks is confusing, as well as liable to overweight the other parts of the ritual. In practice, 11 is about the limit. End quote. Crowley says that 1 knock alone is not useful, as it implies Catherine unity. Thus, all things, and not a single concept like 5 or 7. But I think there is much use in a single knock, especially if you are doing high magic, like ceremonial magic of the great work. To start or end a ritual, a single knock or knell can sometimes suffice to clean the space or clear it, as well as to announce that the ritual is at hand. On this point of the amount of knocks, consider also if it is a single battery, or if you are breaking it up. When using 11 knocks, Crowley often broke it up as 3 knocks, 5 knocks, 3 knocks. Thus, it's the hexagram surrounding the pentagram, and this implies the union of the micro-macrocosms. Crowley in this section then goes on to debrief the reader about the number 11. But I am skipping this, and you can find a very comprehensive analysis of the number 11 in Thelema in that video on this channel, linked below in the description. Now to close this video, quote, we may conclude with a single illustration of how the above principles may be put into practice. Let us suppose that the magician contemplates an operation for the purpose of helping his mind to resist the tendency to wander. This will be a work of Yesod, but he must emphasize the stability of that sephira as against the airy quality which it possesses. His first action will be to put the number 9 under the protection of the 2. The battery at this point will be 191. Divide this into 4 and 5, 4 being the number of fixity, law, and authoritative power, and 5 that of courage, energy, and triumph of the spirit over the elements. He will reflect, moreover, that 4 is symbolic of the stability of matter, while 5 expresses the same idea with regard to motion. At this stage, the battery will appear as 1, 2, 5, 2, 1. After due consideration, he will probably conclude that to split up the central 5 would tend to destroy the simplicity of his formula, and decide to use it as it stands. The possible alternative would be to make a single knock in the center of his battery, as if he appealed to the ultimate immutability of Kether, invoking that unity by placing the fourfold knock on either side of it. In this case, his battery would be 1, 4, 1, 4, 1. He will naturally have been careful to preserve the balance of each part of the battery against the corresponding part. This would be particularly necessary in an operation such as we have chosen for our example." End quote. And that's a wrap. I look forward to seeing y'all in the next one. Love is the law. Love under will.